Welcome to episode 514 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Meyers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing writer-director Mick Davis, who just did a feature thriller with Emile Hirsch called Walden. We talked through this project as well as how he got his start in the business. He originally broke in to the business as a screenwriter and eventually started to write and direct. So we talked through that, how he got some of his first writing credits, and then ultimately how he was able to transition that writing career into a writing and directing career. So stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode 514. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. Quick few words about what I've been working on. So I haven't done an update on sort of what I've been working on lately. A lot of it's just been sort of plugging away. Unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of time to do the rewrite on the rom-com. I'm trying to get off the ground. I've been talking about that for a while. Definitely have been having some issues there. The big issue, or the big thing I've been working on lately, and it's really not film related, although in some ways I guess it does relate to selling your screenplay, is just figuring out credit card processing for one of my online services. Again, eventually I'll get this all set up for selling your screenplay as well. But that's just been a big issue. I'm just dealing with some, as I said, credit card processing issues. And I've got a big server upgrade to take care of. And that's, does involve selling your screenplay, the server that the site is on, and all the services run off of this same server. It's just gotten out of date. The operating system is old and it's no longer supported. They're no longer upgrading it and patching it and that sort of stuff. So at some point you do have to just move your sites over to a new server. And I'm at that point. It's, it could be an easy project that only takes me a week or two, and it could be something that I get, bogged down for a month or two. So I'm just battling some of this sort of normal type life stuff that kind of gets in the way of our creative work. That's the fight that I've been having lately. But anyway, slowly but surely I am trying to get some of that stuff off my plate so I can get back to the writing and the filmmaking. I've also been trying to work on the festival for next year. I'm having some issues securing a good theater at a reasonable price, so that's been a little bit of a pain for me. We had a great venue this past year, Look Drive Dine-In Cinemas out in Glendale, and I'm still hoping to return there next year, but they want a lot more money for the same space. So I'm just not sure if the film festival can support that currently, but hopefully it can. Hopefully I can work that out and get moving on that. But that's definitely been taking a little bit of my time as well. Anyways, those are some of the things I have been working on. Now let's get into the main segment. Today I am interviewing writer-director Mick Davis. Here is the interview. Welcome, Mick, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
Well, I grew up in Glasgow, Scotland, and I'd always, ever since I was a kid, like every kid, there was always either movies or books, whatever. And I loved the idea of storytelling. And I used to watch all the old classics, the James Cagneys, the Humphrey Bogarts, all that kind of stuff. And then eventually it was watching The Godfather that inspired me to want to get into this business. And I was in professional soccer and I left it. And I decided to come out here for 6 months and coach Rod Stewart's soccer team, he would happen to be a fan of the team I was with back in Scotland. And he invited me. He said, if you ever want to come out and, try your hand in the movie business and coach my team while you're here. So I did. And then I wrote a script called Paganini about the violinist from the 18th century, which got me an agent at CAA. And then it was read by Mickey Rourke's manager, who introduced me to Mickey. And I spent the next 10 years of my career working with Mickey, writing and basically learning the craft, because I never went to film school.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, it progressed. I became more of like an actor's writer. And I started working with people like Pacino and Brosnan and stuff like that. And then I wrote a script that there was a bidding war for. And then I said, well, I will sell it if I can direct it, which was called The Match. And then began my directing career. And I've been quite lucky in the sense that I've never really been out of work too long, so that's always a good thing.
Yeah. So maybe you can give us some comparisons. How does the sports world differ, and how is it the same as the entertainment world?
Well, the thing that's similar between, like, for me in professional soccer versus a set, say with 25 actors or whatever it is, you're dealing with personalities. In soccer, I had 22 players I had to coach and 22 different personalities. So you have to be all things to all men. And so that kind of trained me for the day I got on a set and I had to deal with a bunch of actors. And so I was more or less prepared for that, because I knew how to sort of negotiate various personalities and how to get the best out of them. So that was a similarity there. And then, of course, the end game is, like in soccer, you want to win the game. And in movies, you want to make a decent movie that hopefully people will like. So, you're looking for a win when it comes to that. But that's the similarity right there when it comes to sport and film.
Yeah. So just give us some details. You mentioned that you were working specifically with some actors as a writer. So what do those jobs actually look like? It's like an actor like Al Pacino. He gets to know you and he trusts that you sort of have his voice. So then he brings you on to do a rewrite on a script that he's attached to, or are you writing more spec scripts out of the gate for a guy like Al Pacino? But just maybe you can talk about that. How does that actually work?
Well, it was back in the 90s, and what happened was I was in Paris and I was writing the sequel to 9.5 Weeks, which I had gotten the job to do through Mickey. And while I was there, there's a casting director who's kind of legendary. Her name is Bonnie Timmerman. She's cast everything you can imagine. Her first gig was Amadeus, and she's done everything for De Niro and Bruckheimer. And she was in the same hotel, and we got talking. She asked to read something. She read Paganini. She asked me what I wanted to do. I said, I want to make a movie about the painter Modigliani. And she said, oh, Al Pacino's been trying to do that for years. I should let Al know about this. So she told Al, who is good friends with her. And I'd happened to have written a spec script on Modigliani, and he read the script and he loved it, and he asked to meet me. So when I got back to LA, he was screening a documentary of his called Looking for Richard at CAA. And then we went for dinner after it, and we got talking, and he'd been offered the movie Surviving Picasso, but he said, I've always wanted to play Modigliani. And I said, well, Surviving Picasso is a different kind of story, and my story deals with the energy and the vitality of a great painter like Modigliani. And at that point, he decided to pass on Picasso, which Anthony Hopkins ended up playing. And then for the next 2-3 years, we developed Modigliani along with the play, the Dennis McIntyre play, which was bought for Al by Fox. And we tried to combine my script with that play, and it wasn't so easy. We got to a place where we were reasonably happy, but it was taking too long to get the movie made. And I personally felt that my original spec script was the kind of energy and vitality I wanted my lead character to have. So at that point, Al went his way and I went my way, and I got a call from Andy Garcia, who said, I heard that the script is now available. I'd love to meet you. We met, and right away I said, yes, you can play the role. And eventually we made the movie.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a great story. Now, you mentioned this spec script got into a bidding war. And so at that point, you said, well, I'll sell it, but I want to be attached as a director. Had you directed a few things up to that point? And just maybe you can give us some sort of tips on that. Obviously, you're in a position of power that there's a bidding war, so you have some leverage. I get a lot of, first-time writers that want to do this, and I'm always very skeptical to recommend. I mean, if nobody really wants your script, they're not really going to or they marginally want your script, they're not going to necessarily bring you on as a director. But maybe you can talk about leading up to that point. Had you directed some stuff, and how did you know you had this leverage and you had the power to insert yourself and really stand firm as yes, I want to direct it?
Right. Well, I think what happened was I'd first of all, by that point, I had 6 years under my belt working with Mickey Rourke and being on all the sets, including the 9.5 Weeks 2 set that I had written. So I had a good handle on, what the floor was like and how to deal with actors. And then what happened was I'd written this script called The Match. And my agent responded to it and said, this is a great script, and I think we could sell this script. And I said to him, look, it's now time for me to step up. I want to direct. I believe I can do it. And so I'm prepared to lose the sale of the script if no one will take me on as a director. And so he took the script out there with me attached as a director. And happily enough, we ended up with a bidding war. We had a couple of studios wanting it. Pierce Brosnan's company wanted it. And then the late Steve Golan, who was a great producer who discovered David Fincher, who had a company called Propaganda, he read the script and asked to meet me. And he said, I love this script so much, I'm willing to take the risk because I do that. That's what I do with young directors, people who want to direct. And I said, well, all I had ever directed was a couple of commercials in Europe. And so that's all I'd done. I'd never gone beyond 30 or 45 seconds. So, but I know my script and I know how to deal with actors. And so he gave me the chance, and we had a lot of fun doing that. And so I gave him the script, and to sweeten the pot, he gave me a blind script deal because he really wanted the script. And then so I went off. A couple of days later, I was in England casting it. And before long, I had Pierce Brosnan, Tom Sizemore, Sir Ian Holm, Richard E. Grant. I had a phenomenal cast.
Yeah.
And we had a blast, and that's how it came about.
Perfect. Yeah, another great story. So let's dig into your latest film, Walden, starring Emile Hirsch, which you wrote and directed. Maybe to start out, you can give us a quick pitch or log line. What is this new film all about?
Well, Walden Dean is a courtroom stenographer who lives in a small town in the deep south in Georgia. And he is very much a part of the background. He has he has no real presence to anyone other than good morning or good evening. And he goes about his life with no expectation until he finds out there is something wrong with him medically. And at that point, he has seen so much pain in the courtroom and so many bad guys get away with terrible crimes that he decides that if I'm going out, I'm going to take out a few of the people who have caused so much pain to innocents. And he sets about doing that. But ironically enough, at the same time, the one thing he's never looked for in his life comes right there onto his lap, which is a love story. So he has choice. It's, do I pursue my revenge or my vigilantism, or do I stop right now and pursue this love story? And he makes his choice and he follows it through. I don't want to give too much away to the audience, but that's what happened.
Yeah. So where did this idea come from? What was sort of the genesis of this story?
The Johnny Depp trial. I watched Johnny and Amber Heard, and while everyone was focused on the two of them, I was watching the stenographer sitting there, and I started wondering to myself, what does that lady do when she gets home at night? Does she take care of her husband? Does she feed the kids? Does she take her dog for a walk? Does she throw on a costume and jump from a tall building to save people in an alleyway from being beaten up? And then the first thing that popped in my head is, what if a stenographer had a secret life? And that secret life was taking care of business and helping people. And then just the name Walden came into my head, and that was it.
Gotcha. Okay. So when you have an idea like this, maybe you can just run it through your process. So you have an agent, I assume now. Do you have a manager? Do you have some other writers, producer friends? When you have an idea like this, do you pitch them the idea? Do you develop it into a one page and then get some feedback? Or do you just go write the full script and then get feedback? How does something like this sort of move along?
Well, what happened with this one, which was really nice, is that the producers on it had actually come to me and said, "We want to make a movie with you. Is there anything you'd like to do?" And in a Zoom call, I said, "I'd like to do a movie about a court stenographer." And they kind of looked at me strangely as though, what does that go? And then when I described what he does, then they lit up and said, "Okay, so let's go to script." I'm terrible at treatments and synopsis and one pages. I can't write them. I'm hopeless at it. So I just went straight to script and I wrote a draft in 2 weeks, which was the template for what we did in the movie. And that's how it worked on that. I mean, in other cases, I write spec. If I have an idea, I don't sit around waiting for somebody to give me a check. I write it because I believe a writer should be writing. Mm-hmm. And I have a discipline where I write every day. For 3-4 hours, and even go back into old scripts and revamp them and give them some fresh breath. But ultimately with Walden, I was very lucky that I had producers who wanted to make a movie with me, and they responded to my idea.
Gotcha. So let's talk about your writing process a little bit. You said you write every day for 3-4 hours. Where do you typically write? Do you have a home office? Do you go out to Starbucks? You need that ambient noise. And when do you typically write? Are you a morning person, a late person? Just what does your writing schedule look like?
Usually I get up in the morning, have a cup of coffee, and then sit down and open up the computer and look at maybe 3 or 4 pieces that I've been looking, and then see which one grabs me the most. And then I'll go into it. And what I generally do is, as I say, I never do treatments. I go straight to script because I just want to get into it. For good or for bad, it's just the way I am, the way I work. A lot of people like to put cards up on the wall and fill the wall with cards and scenes and then bring all that down and put it together. I don't have the patience for that. And so I just sit down and I go page 1 and I just keep going. And then I let the script take me in the direction it wants to take me, especially the character, because I'm usually driven by the character. I'm very much a character writer. And the plot itself is usually evolving as the character goes forward. So that's my process. After 3-4 hours of writing, I think to myself, okay, I want to stop while I'm still fresh. And then I'll get back to whatever it is tomorrow.
Now, you mentioned you wrote this first draft in about 2 weeks. Do those days, do they go past this 3 or 4 hours, or, basically 12 days at 3 or 4 hours, you can produce a full script?
No, usually in that situation, because I knew we were going to be shooting in a couple of months, then it was a case of sitting down. I happened to be in London at the time and I was working on another script that I had a job for. But then I worked on Walden at the same time, and I was probably doing a good 8 hours a day on Walden because I got so excited with the script and the character and where he was going that I just couldn't stop. So I felt I had it in me to keep going each day for sometimes 8, sometimes 6, but ultimately until I got through the draft, which probably took just under 2 weeks. And then that draft went to the producers. They responded positively. They had a couple of notes. We changed them. And ultimately, we never went to many colors. I think we went to pink when we were shooting, and that was about it, because the rest of the tweaking on the script was done on the floor with the actors.
I'm curious, and I'm just curious. I'm going to throw this statement out, and I wonder if you can comment on it. What I find from doing a lot of these podcasts is the folks who do a lot of outlining and index cards before they write the script, they tend to have a much harder time doing rewrites. They don't like to do as many rewrites. They like to plan ahead, and then they do less reading. Whereas the writers that spend less time in the front end, they end up spending a lot more time on the back end doing rewrites. Would you say that's fair for yourself? Is that sort of accurate for yourself? You do a lot more rewriting of the scripts than maybe another writer who does a lot more preparation with outlining.
Right. I think you're right there, actually. I think that's how it goes for me. I get this. I get a draft out because ultimately, I remember talking to David Goyer about this, and David said to me, as he said, I've got to get a draft out. I've got to spew it out, and then I can go into it and rewrite it and rewrite it. Because ultimately, writing is rewriting for me anyway. The process of doing index cards and treatments and everything else, it's kind of like rehearsing with actors before you shoot the movie. I don't rehearse. I like to keep it fresh. That's just my way. And it's the same with script. I like to get the draft out, and then I want to see the response to the draft. And if I'm lucky to have actors attached, actors bring their ideas to it. And if it's cast properly, they bring good ideas and we make it better, because ultimately the script is just the blueprint for what you're about to do, because you have to bring it to life. And the joy of fixing things on the floor is I am the writer. So I know the script. So when an actor says to me, what if we tried this? I already know the effect of what that idea is down the line in the script. And if it's going to be good for the script or bad for the story. And if it works, then I use it, because I'm very open to actors collaborating. I love that. That's the process that I enjoy the most.
So on Walden, it sounds like you kind of had this project basically set up as you were writing it. So there wasn't a lot of back and forth, but on a script where you've just written more as a spec, what does that development process look like for you? Do you have writer friends, producer friends, actor friends? It sounds like you send it out. Maybe you can talk about that, a sort of a typical development process for one of these scripts that you write on spec.
Right. Well, usually what happens is, because I mean, throughout the years, and I've been in the game for over 30 years, so I've written a couple of hundred scripts. Not all of them are good, but they're all basically an exercise, because I mean, that's what writing is for me. Yeah. But when I'm writing a spec script, I usually sit down and write it, and I don't show pages to anyone until I finish a draft. Then I'll go back into the draft and tweak it, rewrite it, fix it, move stuff around. And then when I'm reasonably happy with the draft, it will go to my manager, and he's the first eyes. And then he'll come back and say to me, I like how this works, but I think if you did this with this, and you get that nice objective perception. And it's somebody who cares, because ultimately they want to sell your work, because they want to make money too. So they have the best intentions for themselves and for you. And then I will take the ideas on board. If I think they work, then I will use them. If I don't think they work, my gut will say, no, I'm going to stay with it as is. A good example of that is a script I just finished, spec, that I want to do soon. Is called The Piper. It's based on the Pied Piper of Hamelin, the old fairy tale. And it's a modern version. And I had been wanting to make this or write this script for probably since I was a kid. So I already knew the entire story in my head. And when I put it down, there was very little rewriting to be done. And I gave it to my manager, and he read it, and he says, how many drafts of this did you do? I says, one. And he says, well, you don't need to do anything else on this thing until we get the money to go make the movie. So it was just because it had been fermenting inside of me, The best analogy I can draw there is, I'm a big classical music fan. If you look at Beethoven's work, there's tea stains and coffee stains and scribbles and changes and all kinds of stuff, but it's Beethoven. And if you look at Mozart's work, there isn't a single change in over 600 works. He never made one change, because it was all in his head, and then he put it down on the page. So if I'm lucky, I get to put it down on the page, and it works. And then sometimes there's coffee stains on my scripts,
Yeah. So how do you approach screenplay structure? There's the Blake Snyder, Sid Field, very template driven. There's the act breaks, the midpoints, the inciting incidents. How do you approach that sort of stuff?
It's funny, because when I started writing script, I never had any help. I never went to film school. I would have liked to have gone to film school, but I just didn't have the dough to do it, and I didn't know how the process works. So it was just I went forward, and it was just by default I would end up producing something that someone wanted to read. So I eventually, it was after the fact, I'd written a bunch of scripts, and some of them had gotten made, and then I read Save the Cat,
Mhm.
And the structure of Save the Cat, and I thought, that's pretty cool. So I sat down with the next thing I wrote, which was a big sort of template kind of movie. And I used that structure, and it worked for me to great effect. But then when I went back to writing something more personal, it didn't really work for me. So I think it depends on the genre or whatever it is. But with me, it's always the character. You know, I know what the end game is. I know what I want at the end. How do I get there? Sometimes I work backwards from the end to find where my character should be. And then sometimes I will say to myself, okay, end of first, it should be this, midpoint should be this, end of second should be this, and then the roller coaster should end with this. And when I have these, even just a line for each of that, then it's a case of just building the story from that point on. It's always foundation and then bricks.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So how about genre requirements? Now, as you were pitching this on a Zoom meeting, I assume there might have been some criteria going into that meeting, like, well, we want a thriller as opposed to a period drama. What was sort of the thought process with this idea, and did you have to fit it into sort of a specific genre, bucket to market it? And just maybe you can talk about that a little bit, how that played into it.
Well, the producers wanted a movie that they could sell and make money on, so they could go make another movie after that.
Surprise, surprise.
Process, right? And but having said that, they also had known me for years, and they know the way I work, and they liked the way I worked, so that was comfortable. And then it was a case of, let's do a thriller. Let's do a thriller, Mick. And I said, okay, well, he's a stenographer who ends up becoming a vigilante. Of course, at that point, it's a pitch, and they have to trust the pitch until they see the page. So ultimately, I knew going into the script that I was writing a thriller, and I must always address that and make sure that that's the direction I'm headed in. So ultimately, but at the time I got to the end of the script and I'd read through it, I thought to myself, okay, this is a very dark thriller. I hope they like it. And they read it and they loved it. And they said, all right, let's green light this, and we'll give you some notes. And that's kind of how it worked,
Yeah, yeah. So just in general, what advice do you have to young writers coming into the business? What do you tell someone if they show up and say, hey, I want to be a screenwriter? What should I be doing? What is your advice to those folks?
Well, the first thing is to write. And you've got to write. You've got to sit down and write. You can't. People come to me all the time and they'll say, I've got a great idea for a movie. And then they'll give you, the matchbook take on it. And it's 2 sentences. And then you say, okay, where's the rest? And then they'll look at you and say, well, isn't that your job? Right. So I say to young writers, you got to sit down and write. You can't avoid it. It's a horrible, lonely life to be a writer. But when you lose yourself in your world, and Charles Dickens is the best example of that, that the amount of characters that he created, and it was a solitary guy sitting at a desk every day with a quill pen, writing 400-500 page books, and they've lasted for 150 years so far. So if you genuinely want to be a writer, write from what you know and not what you think an audience will want. Because audiences are changing every day. Tastes are changing every day. We have so much material kicking around now that I think the best thing that anyone can do is to write what they know. And that in itself should help them feel more attached to the material that they're doing, as opposed to, trying to sort of write the next Marvel movie and hope that you're ahead of the game. It never works like that. It just never works. And then when you get despondent, put it down, leave it alone. And then when you leave it alone, if it starts talking to you and asks you to come back and keep working on it, great. And if it doesn't, then you either have to move on to something else, another idea, or give up. But there's no secret formula. You just have to write.
Yeah, for sure. That's sound advice. So how can people see Walden? What is the release schedule going to be like?
Well, we're a limited release in theaters on November 10th. across the country. Fingers crossed. At this point in time, people seem to be responding positively, which is great.
Mhm.
And then it goes to VOD December 12th, and digital and whatever else, and then it will be out there for everyone to see. So so we're very excited about Walden right now.
Yeah, perfect. And what have you seen recently that you could recommend to our mostly screenwriting audience? Anything on HBO, Netflix, Hulu, anything you're watching that you just think is good?
It's funny because I have such varied tastes. For instance, David Fincher's Mank, which is about the making of Citizen Kane and the writing of the script. Huh. So for a writer to watch Mank is a great thing, I think, because it's about a writer who's played by Gary Oldman trying to understand what Orson Welles wants on the page. And it deals a lot with the Randolph Hearst and the relationship that Mank had with Randolph Hearst. And ultimately, being bedridden and still writing probably what we consider to be the greatest movie ever made. So that's a wonderful movie to watch, and it's Fincher's movie.
That's a great recommendation. I haven't seen that yet, so I'll put that on my list. What's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing? Anything you're comfortable sharing, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram? I will round that up for the show notes.
Well, I'm not a big social media person, to be honest.
Yeah, no worries.
But I am on Instagram and I am on Facebook. I really don't. The only reason I got on Facebook is to keep my eye on my two kids who live in Sweden to make sure they're living a normal life. But that's about it, really. And then in terms of what I'm doing next, I think, IMDb is pretty good for letting you know and stuff. Yeah. But the next one is The Sculptor with Andy. And then after that, I'm doing another thriller called Due Process in Alabama.
Okay.
So there's plenty to keep me busy and off the streets right now,
Yeah, perfect. So I'll put your IMDb page. People can click over that and just keep it at things. Well, I appreciate you coming on and talking today. Good luck with this film and good luck with your future projects as well.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the time.
Hey, thank you. We'll talk to you later.
Have a great one. Bye.
A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, character, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write your logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline and synopsis writing service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase this service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your screenplay gets a recommend or a consider from one of our readers, you get to list the screenplay in the SYS Select database, which is a database for producers to find screenplays and a big part of our SYS Select program. Producers are in the database searching for material on a daily basis, so it's another great way to get your material in front of them. As a further bonus, if your script gets a recommend from one of our readers, your screenplay will get included in our monthly Best Of newsletter. Each month we send out a newsletter that highlights the best screenplays that have come through our script analysis service. This is a monthly newsletter that goes out to our list of over 400 producers who are actively looking for material. So again, this is another great way to get your material out there. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing the filmmaking team of Cheston Mizzle and L.E. Stamen, who just did a really independent film called Love Virtually. It's an ensemble romance where they combine live action with a lot of CGI. It's sort of a modern take on sort of the metaverse and all of this sort of CGI and interacting in a virtual world. Again, it's a very independent film, and they're very candid about how it all came together for them. They talk about, and I ask some questions about the CGI, the metaverse, and all of this sorts of stuff that they were not necessarily experts on at the beginning of this. They just had a passion for this particular story and sort of figured it out. So we really walk through a lot of that, how they got this thing finished, how they got it funded, and then ultimately just what they're doing with it and how they're out there promoting it. So it's another just really interesting story. These guys just got out there and they're just making things happen for themselves. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. That's the show. Thank you for listening.